There is a kind of silence that is not born from peace, but from absence. It does not soothe you, it does not invite you to rest. It stands at the edge of your life like a shadow you cannot name. You feel it in the mornings when you wake and realize no one is listening for your footsteps. You hear it in the evenings, when the streets are empty, the windows dim, and the air itself seems to hesitate before touching you. It is not just the lack of sound, it is the weight of that lack. A presence invisible yet undeniable that lingers in the corners of your home, in the space between your thoughts, in the unlit corridors of your own heart. A wooden chair still and waiting, a clock on the wall ticking with mechanical indifference. The day passes and the night arrives, but nothing changes. And in that unchanging rhythm, time itself begins to feel like a stranger. You think of the friends you once had, the voices that once filled your days. They are gone, some by choice, some by fate, some by the slow erosion of years. And now, the silence is your only constant companion. We have been taught to fear this silence, to see loneliness as a wound, to escape it with noise, with screens, with endless movement. But what if? What if loneliness was not the absence of connection, but the presence of something deeper? What if this silence was not empty, but full of questions you have avoided, full of truths that only arrive when the world falls quiet, full of a presence that does not belong to any person, yet belongs entirely to you? In the old mysteries, the seeker was always led away from the crowd, taken beyond the city gates, set down in the desert, the forest, the cave. The air was still, the ground was bare, and there, alone, they were told, listen. But listen to what? No voice came from the sky. No figure stepped forward. Instead, they began to hear themselves. Not the shallow self, the one shaped by roles and names, but the deeper self, the one that has no name because it is older than time. This is the threshold where you now stand, between the life you have known and the life you have yet to discover. Loneliness is not simply a state of being alone. It is a doorway, a place between two worlds. One world, noisy, familiar, filled with distractions. The other, silent, unknown, and perhaps infinite. Most turn away from this doorway. They rush back into noise, into busyness, into the comfort of repetition. They avoid the questions that rise in the dark. Who am I without my titles? Without my friends? Without my routines? What is left when everything else has gone? But those who remain, those who dare to stay in that silence, find that it begins to change. The air grows lighter, the shadows soften, and from somewhere, not outside but within, a current begins to flow. It carries a sense of presence, not human, but vast, not personal, but intimate. Helena Blavatsky once walked through such silences. She knew the isolation of far-off places, of years spent among strangers, of nights without a single friendly voice. And she did not run from it. She wrote that to meet the infinite, one must first strip away the noise that covers the soul. Loneliness was not her enemy. It was her initiation. So perhaps your loneliness is not here to punish you. Perhaps it is here to prepare you, to draw you away from what you thought was your life, and lead you to the life that has been waiting for you all along. Imagine this. The chair is still empty, the clock is still ticking, the streets outside are still deserted. But the silence is no longer a stranger. It is a mirror. It reflects back to you not your loss, but your essence. And in that essence, you begin to feel something stirring, a memory, ancient and wordless, a knowing that you have walked through this desert before and that it has always led somewhere. You may not yet know the path. You may not yet understand why this moment has come to you, but you can know this. You are not abandoned here. You have been brought here. And if you will stand in this place, if you will let the silence speak, you may discover that you are not alone after all. You may discover that loneliness is not emptiness, but the first taste of a greater presence. At first, silence may feel neutral, An empty room, a still evening, a space where nothing is happening. But over time it can grow heavier, as if the air itself has taken on weight. It presses on your chest. It follows you from room to room. It begins to sound louder than any noise you've ever heard. This is the moment when silence stops being a background and becomes a presence you cannot escape. For many men in their later years, this is no abstract idea. The shape of their days has changed. The roles they once played, provider, worker, leader, are no longer needed in the same way. The phone rings less. The invitations stop coming. The world that once pulled them forward now moves on without asking if they can keep pace. In the United States, in the United Kingdom, in countless towns and cities around the world, there is a quiet epidemic. Older men living more and more of their lives in isolation. It is not always caused by tragedy. Sometimes it is the slow erosion of connections. Friends moving away, children absorbed in their own lives, routines dissolving one by one. Other times it is the sudden rupture, a death, a divorce, a move, that drops them into a life that feels alien overnight. Studies suggest that loneliness can carry risks as real as physical illness. But even without charts and statistics, we can see it in the eyes of men who no longer speak of their deeper thoughts. The sparkle fades, the laughter is rarer, the voice becomes cautious, as if unsure anyone is truly listening. And so, the silence grows. We live in a time that promises instant connection, devices that can reach anyone, anywhere in seconds. But beneath the glow of screens, the human spirit is often starving. We fill our hours with scrolling, with background noise, with endless shallow contact that never touches the soul. We connect, but we do not commune. We consume, but we are not nourished. It is the great paradox of the modern age. Never have we had so many ways to speak, and never have we said so little that matters. And here lies the most dangerous trap of all. When the silence begins to press in, we instinctively run from it. We fill it with whatever comes easily. Television that numbs the mind, conversations without depth, tasks without purpose. We try to outtalk it, outrun it, outwork it. But the truth remains, the silence is patient. It will wait for us to stop moving, and then it will return. Helena Blavatsky might have looked at this modern condition and called it by its true name, avoidance. In her writings, she spoke of the need to pass through the valley of the shadow within ourselves, rather than to decorate it so we can pretend it isn't there. She believed that the emptiness we feel is not an accident of life, but a signal, not a punishment, but a call. What if the heaviness of silence is not a weight crushing you, but a hand pressing you toward the ground, so you can finally kneel, finally look inward, finally listen? In the Theosophical view, there is no such thing as pure emptiness. What feels like a void is actually space being cleared, so that something greater can enter. But this something cannot arrive while we are frantically filling the space with distractions. It comes only when the noise has been allowed to fade, and when we have the courage to stand still in what remains. And here is the paradox within the paradox. To overcome the loneliness that feels so heavy, we must first be willing to feel it. We must stop seeing it as a flaw, a weakness, a sign that something has gone wrong. We must see it as a teacher who has come uninvited, but for our sake, not our harm. For the man who feels this burden now, the first step is not to banish it, but to recognize it for what it is, a threshold. Yes, the silence is heavy. Yes, the days may feel longer than they once did. Yes, there are moments when you wonder if you still belong anywhere, but within these very moments lies the chance to belong everywhere, to discover the connection that cannot be broken by time, distance, or death. Theosophy teaches that the soul is never alone. It is bound to all other souls by a web of invisible threads, threads of thought, compassion, and will. We may lose sight of them, but they are never severed. When you are still enough, you can begin to feel them again. So the burden you feel is not only the weight of isolation, it is also the pressure of something waiting to emerge, an awareness, an awakening, a return to a connection far deeper than anything the world's distractions can offer. In this light, The silence is no longer your enemy. It is your signal. It is the voice before the voice, the step before the path, the shadow before the dawn. And the question now is, will you answer it? In the language of Theosophy, life is not a straight line from birth to death. It is a series of thresholds, of trials, of initiations. Each one arrives to break the shell of the self you have outgrown, so that something greater can emerge. Some initiations are dramatic: loss, illness, sudden change. Others arrive quietly, without ceremony, but no less powerfully. Loneliness is one of these. Theosophy does not see loneliness as a flaw in your life, or as proof that you have failed to belong. It sees it as an invitation, a deliberate stage in the journey of the soul, a necessary pause in which the outer ties loosen so the inner ties can be seen. Why does it feel so sharp? Because in truth, the soul knows it is never truly alone. It is born from unity, the great whole, the one life, and it carries that unity in its essence. When you feel lonely, what you are actually feeling is not the absence of people, but the absence of your own remembrance. It is the ache of forgetting. Helena Blavatsky wrote that all separation is illusion. To believe that you are an isolated fragment, cut off from the rest of existence, is to stand in the middle of an ocean and cry out for water. You are surrounded by it. You are made of it. But the mind has closed its eyes. This is why loneliness can be so painful. It is not the reality of your condition that hurts, but the falsehood you have come to believe. You feel like a drop, because you have forgotten you are part of the ocean. Imagine for a moment a single drop of water falling from the sky into a vast, still sea. The drop thinks, I am separate, I am alone. But as soon as it touches the surface, it realizes it always belonged here. The separation was never real. It was only a story the drop carried in its descent. This is the Theosophical view of loneliness, a story of descent into forgetfulness, followed by a return to remembrance. The descent is not a mistake. It is part of the path. Only by feeling the illusion of separation can we truly awaken to the joy of unity. And so, in this stage of initiation, you are given a choice. You can believe the illusion, see yourself as cut off, incomplete, defined by absence, and live within that shadow. Or, you can use the very discomfort you feel as a signal to look deeper, not outward but inward, to ask not who will fill this space, but what truth is hidden beneath this space. Theosophy teaches that every human soul is a spark of the divine flame, not metaphorically, but literally part of the living essence of the universe. That essence cannot be diminished by circumstance, by distance, or even by death. It is indestructible. It is eternal, and it is shared. The same flame burns in every soul. When you remember this, loneliness changes shape. It may still visit you. The room may still be empty. The phone may still be silent. But it no longer defines you. You know that beyond the limits of your senses, you are held in an infinite web of life. You belong not to a single household or a single city or even a single world, but to the all. Blavatsky often warned her students, do not mistake the shell for the soul. The shell is your personality, the name, the history, the role. The soul is the eternal traveler wearing that shell for a time. When life removes certain people or situations from you, it may feel like your very self is being diminished, but in truth, it is the shell that is being reshaped, so the soul can breathe more freely. Seen this way, loneliness is not the end of something. It is the beginning of seeing who you are without the constant reflection of others. It strips away the familiar mirrors and forces you to face your own image, unframed, unfiltered. And for many, that is the first true step toward awakening. The Theosophical path does not promise that this is easy. It does not deny the sting of empty rooms or the longing for shared laughter. But it reframes the meaning. This stage is not punishment. It is preparation. It is not abandonment. It is initiation. Every initiation has its guardian. In this one, the guardian is silence itself. It will stand before you until you recognize that you are not its prisoner, but its pupil. And once you do, the silence will open into a vastness you could not have imagined. Not an empty void, but a living field, filled with the pulse of all life. So the next time loneliness comes to sit beside you, do not send it away too quickly. Ask it what it has brought. Listen for the truth beneath its stillness. It may be carrying a reminder older than time. You have never been alone. You have only forgotten the ocean from which you came. And when you remember, the drop and the ocean are one again. If we wish to understand how loneliness can become initiation, we need only look at the life of Helena Blavatsky herself. Her journey was marked not only by adventure and discovery, but by long, silent stretches where she walked entirely alone. And it was in these stretches, not in the crowded salons or lecture halls, that the deeper architecture of her soul was forged. The first of these came when she left the safety of her family home in Russia. She was barely 17, still carrying the air of youth, but already restless with the boundaries of her world. The marriage she had entered was a cage, and she refused to live in it. She walked away in an act almost unthinkable for a woman of her time, and found herself in the rugged lands of the Caucasus. For years she lived there, far from the society that had raised her. The winters were long, the mountains severe. She had no familiar circle, no constant companionship, and yet, this was where the first whispers of her greater calling began to reach her. It was in the absence of constant noise that she began to hear something older, vaster, a signal that would later draw her toward the east. Her second great initiation in solitude was far more dramatic. She set out alone, crossing borders, oceans, and cultures in a time when such travel was perilous for anyone, especially a woman. There were nights when she slept under strange roofs, not knowing the language of those around her. There were days when she walked unfamiliar streets with no one to call her name. From the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, from the ports of Europe to the shadowed temples of the East, she moved like a solitary pilgrim. In each place she carried with her the same silence she had known in the Caucasus. But now it had become a companion rather than an enemy. It was as if the more she traveled, the more she realized that the world itself was one great breathing organism, and she was simply moving through its veins. The culmination of her solitude came years later, in an unlikely place, New York City. She arrived in 1873, a stranger in a city overflowing with people, and yet, in the midst of millions, she was utterly alone. Her rooms were small, her funds almost non-existent. The bustling streets outside offered every kind of distraction, but few true connections. She spent hours, days, months in quiet work, writing, studying, weaving together the strands of the wisdom she had gathered on her travels. No one knew her name. No one guessed that the woman in the modest apartment was preparing to launch a movement that would change the spiritual landscape of the modern world. To an outside observer, these periods might have looked like failure, like exile, like loss. But Blavatsky knew otherwise. Each time she was cut off from familiar voices, she found herself listening more intently to the inner one. Each time life took away her outer circles, it drew her closer to the great circle that connects all souls. In the Caucasus, she learned endurance, the ability to remain when nothing around you is moving. In her solitary travels, she learned trust, that the unknown is not to be feared, but embraced. In New York, she learned focus, the discipline to use the quiet seasons to create foundations that could hold the weight of her mission. When the Theosophical Society was finally born in 1875, it was not the product of constant companionship, but of long preparation in solitude. Her vision had been shaped, her resilience tempered, and her purpose clarified in the very periods when the world might have thought she was doing nothing. This is the deeper truth hidden in her life. Solitude is not the absence of life. It is the place where life is distilled. It strips away the non-essential until only the essential remains. And from that essence, a new chapter can begin. Blavatsky never romanticized isolation. She knew its hardships, its cold nights, its moments of doubt. But she also knew that, like the ancient initiations of the mystery schools, the candidate must pass through a chamber alone before the next door will open. Her own chambers had been the mountains, the ships, the cramped rooms in distant cities, and each one had opened a door. For the man sitting in his own room today, feeling the same weight of separation, her story carries a quiet message. This is not wasted time. This is not the end of your journey. It is a chapter of preparation, as vital as any that came before. The outer world may not see the change yet, but within, if you choose to use it, this season can forge a strength, a clarity, a vision that will carry you into the next stage of your life, just as it carried her. And perhaps one day, you too will look back on your own season of isolation and see that it was the doorway you had to walk through to find the life that was truly yours. There comes a point in the path when the outer voices fall away, the conversations grow fewer, the noise of the world fades into a distant hum, and in that strange hush, a different kind of sound begins to emerge. Not from the streets, not from the mouths of others, but from within. Theosophy teaches that every seeker, every true disciple, must walk through a period known as the desert. It is not a literal place of sand and sun, but a state of life in which the familiar supports are stripped away. In the desert, you are left with only yourself. Your companions are silence by day and the unblinking stars by night. Here, there are no distractions to hide in, no constant affirmations to feed the personality. It is in this nakedness that the soul learns to listen. Why is the desert necessary? Because the outer world speaks too loudly. It tells you who you are, what you should be, how you should live. And in its roar, the softer, deeper voice of your true nature is drowned. The desert is where the volume of the outer world is turned down, so the voice of the inner master can finally be heard. In Theosophy, the inner master is not a poetic idea. It is a living presence within the soul. It is the fragment of the higher self, the link to the great source, the quiet but unwavering compass that points toward truth. It does not shout, it waits. And it will not interfere until the seeker is ready to listen. Imagine for a moment that your loneliness is not an enemy, but a teacher. Not a punishment, but a master who has been sent to train you. It sits across from you in the quiet room. It asks no questions. It only watches, waiting for you to stop running from its gaze. At first, this presence feels unbearable. We are so used to filling the air with conversation, with the flicker of screens, with the endless motion of tasks. To sit without them feels like standing in an empty field under a vast, merciless sky. But if you remain, if you allow the stillness to hold you, something begins to change. The silence ceases to feel like emptiness. It becomes a space in which another kind of dialogue can take place. You begin to notice subtle impressions, a thought that feels wiser than your usual thoughts, a knowing that arrives without logic, a sense of direction that has no visible map. This is the voice of the inner master, your own higher consciousness, speaking now that it finally has the room to be heard. The old initiates knew this truth well. In every mystery school, the disciple was sent away from the community at a certain stage. They would live apart, in caves or temples, often for months or years. They were told to meditate, to fast, to contemplate. But beneath all those instructions was the real task, to meet the master within. For until you have met that master, you are not truly prepared to serve the greater work. Outer service without inner guidance is like walking into a labyrinth without a thread to lead you out. The inner master is that thread, a direct link between your daily life and the deeper laws that govern all life. The desert season of your life, the one you might now be calling loneliness, is the very space in which this meeting can happen. It is the training ground for discernment, for patience, for the ability to act from a place of inner authority rather than outer approval. When you see your loneliness in this way, it stops being something you merely endure. It becomes something you work with. Each moment alone is an appointment with your own higher self. Each hour of silence is a lesson in listening without impatience. Each day without outer affirmation is a day in which you learn to find your affirmation in truth itself. So I invite you, in the quiet of your own room, in the stillness of your own days, to imagine this. Across from you, unseen but deeply felt, sits a wise companion. Its gaze is steady, its presence is calm. It has been with you since before your birth, and it will remain after every face and name you know has faded. This is the inner master. Ask it your questions and listen, not for words spoken aloud, but for the subtle shifts in your perception, for the clarity that arises without strain. You may discover that you already carry the answers you have been seeking outside yourself. And when the day comes that your desert ends, when people and noise return, you will not lose that voice. You will carry it into the crowd like a hidden lamp, lighting your steps no matter how loud the world becomes again. Loneliness, then, is not merely an empty space to escape from. It is the sacred classroom in which you are taught the most vital lesson of the path. Before you can serve the world, you must know the voice of the one within you who serves only truth. Loneliness, when understood, becomes more than a condition. It becomes a path. A path that, if walked with awareness, does not lead deeper into isolation, but out into the vast field of the soul's true life. Theosophy offers 3 time-tested ways to walk this path. 3 ancient currents that can carry a man from the shores of emptiness into the ocean of meaning. They are simple, but never shallow. They require no temples, no elaborate rites, no rare initiations, only the willingness to practice them with sincerity. The first is silent contemplation. This is not the silence of escape, not a retreat into numbness, not the avoidance of life's demands. It is the silence of communion. In this practice you sit, perhaps in the early hours before the world has woken, or in the fading light when the day's work is done. You close your eyes. You let the mind's surface chatter settle, like dust falling to the floor. And in that stillness, you do not try to think your way to understanding. You listen, not with the ears, but with the entire being. In Theosophy, silent contemplation is the tuning of the inner instrument so it can resonate with the higher currents of truth. It is a meeting place between you and the deeper self, between your finite awareness and the infinite field it belongs to. A few minutes each day, practiced faithfully, begins to soften the walls of separation. You start to feel that you are not sitting in silence, but with silence, as one sits with a trusted friend. The second is sacred study. Loneliness can shrink the mind, trapping it in small circles of thought. Sacred study opens windows. It is the deliberate act of feeding your consciousness with ideas that expand it, truths that reach beyond the personal, concepts that remind you of the great arc of human and cosmic evolution. This may mean opening the voice of the silence, the Bhagavad Gita, or light on the path. It may mean reading the letters of the masters, or exploring the writings of sages across ages and cultures. The point is not to consume these works like ordinary information, but to let them work upon you. Read slowly with pauses. Let a sentence echo in the mind until it changes the texture of your thoughts. In time, these teachings become companions, quiet, luminous presences that walk with you, offering counsel in the moments when no human voice is near. The third is selfless service, perhaps the most powerful of all. For while contemplation and study turn you inward and upward, service turns you outward, breaking the illusion that you are sealed off from the world. In Theosophy, service is not charity done to relieve guilt, nor a transaction to earn favor. It is the recognition that the same life that breathes in you, breathes in all. When you act for the good of another without seeking return, you are building a bridge from the small I to the greater we. It may be as simple as writing a letter to someone you know is struggling, offering a ride to a neighbor, or volunteering a few hours in a place where help is needed. In these moments, you feel the walls of separation dissolve. You remember that the current of life flows through all beings, and in serving another, you are really serving the self in its larger form. These 3, contemplation, study, and service, are not separate tracks but threads in the same rope. Together they are strong enough to pull a man out of the pit of isolation, not by fixing the loneliness, but by transforming it into a force for awakening. For when you sit in silent communion, you discover you are never truly alone. When you study the words of wisdom, you join a great conversation that spans centuries. When you serve selflessly, you stand shoulder to shoulder with the unseen brotherhood of souls who labor for the good of all. It is not the outer circumstance that changes first. You may still live alone. Your days may still be quiet, but your perception changes. What once felt like a prison becomes a sanctuary. What once felt like a void becomes a vessel. And slowly, the vessel fills with meaning, with purpose, with the deep knowing that you are part of something vast and indivisible. Theosophy does not promise that the human heart will never ache. It promises something greater, that the ache can be used. It can be the very force that draws you toward the inner master, toward the life of the soul, toward a participation in the work that has no boundaries in time or space. So if you find yourself walking this desert road, take these 3 companions with you. Sit each day in silence, not to escape the world, but to meet the source within it. Feed your mind with truths that lift it above the confines of personal grief. And find one small, real way each day to act for the good of another. These are not distractions from loneliness. They are transformations of it. They do not push it away. They transmute it into a current that carries you further along the path, until one day you realize that loneliness has been your teacher all along. There is a truth, ancient as the stars and intimate as your own breath. You have never been alone, not for one heartbeat, not for one instant. Though the senses insist that you are a separate being, sealed inside your own skin, Theosophy teaches a deeper vision, that every life is a thread in a single, boundless tapestry. This tapestry is not metaphor. It is a living field, a field of consciousness, unseen yet omnipresent, binding every atom, every creature, every soul into one great whole. In the language of the sages, this is the one life, the current of existence that flows through galaxies, suns, oceans, forests, and through you. It is not out there somewhere. It is the ground you stand upon, the air you breathe, the pulse behind your own heartbeat. Imagine for a moment that you could see this field, not with the physical eyes, but with the sight of the soul. You would see threads of light running from you to every other being, to strangers in far-off cities, to the birds in the sky, to the silent stones under your feet. You would see that your every thought sends a ripple into this ocean of consciousness, touching lives you will never meet. And you would see that countless ripples from others are touching you even now. The masters of wisdom, the ones known in Theosophy as the White Brotherhood, dwell in constant awareness of this field. They are not myths, not poetic symbols, but living souls who have crossed the threshold of separateness and entered fully into the life of the whole. They work quietly, invisibly, not for recognition, but to sustain and guide the evolution of humanity. Their influence does not arrive as a dramatic voice from the clouds. It moves as an undercurrent in the mind, as a quiet strength in moments when you thought you had none, as a sudden clarity that lights your path. These masters do not force themselves upon us. They wait, patient as the mountains, until the disciple begins to tune his life to the frequency of the one life. This tuning does not require that you see them or know their names. It begins simply with compassion for all beings, with service given without expectation, with the effort to think and act as if all are truly connected. And when you live this way, the invisible fraternity becomes a reality in your experience. You may still sit alone in your room, yet feel a presence. Not the presence of one person, but of a great company, a silent brotherhood that walks beside you. In truth, you are never just you. You are a cell in the living body of humanity, and humanity itself is a cell in the greater body of the earth, and the earth a spark in the greater body of the cosmos. Theosophy calls this the science of unity, because it is not blind faith, but a truth you can test in your own life. When you send out a thought of kindness, you will feel a subtle lifting of your own heart, because in helping the whole, you help yourself. When you meditate upon the good of all, you may find solutions to problems you thought were personal, because they are not truly separate from the problems of the greater field. Even now, as you listen, you are part of this invisible exchange. Every insight you receive, every sense of peace or renewal you feel, does not end with you. It moves outward into the unseen network, touching others in ways you may never know. The White Brotherhood works within this law, the law that no act of true goodwill is ever lost, no act of service ever wasted. Their task is vast, to help humanity awaken to its shared life, to guide individuals toward their own master within, and to prepare the human family for the next step in its spiritual evolution. And they do this not from some unreachable height, but from within the same world we inhabit, though their awareness ranges far beyond the limits of ordinary perception. To know this is to see your loneliness in a new light. Your body may be alone, your house may be quiet, but spiritually, you are surrounded, woven into an unbroken network of life, mind, and purpose. Even in your most silent moments, there are intelligences, great and small, whose lives intersect with yours in ways you cannot yet see. And so the task changes. The goal is not to escape loneliness as if it were an enemy, but to awaken to the reality that you are already in communion with all that exists. The silence becomes a space where you can feel this communion more clearly, without the static of worldly noise. Remember this: every thought of love strengthens the unseen bonds between souls. Every act of compassion is an offering into the great work of the Masters. Every step you take toward unity in your own heart brings the whole of humanity a step closer to its destined awakening. You have never been alone, and you never will be. There comes a moment on the path, often unexpected, often quiet, when what once felt like emptiness begins to feel like fullness. Not because the outer world has changed, but because your relationship to the silence has transformed. I have heard the stories of seekers who walked through years of solitude, men and women who sat in small rooms with nothing but their own thoughts, who wandered along empty country roads, who awoke each morning to a stillness that seemed to press against their chest. At first, the silence felt oppressive, like a shadow that followed them. But over time, something began to shift. One man, a retired sailor in the northern coasts of Scotland, told me of the day he stopped fighting the silence. For years after leaving the sea, he would fill every moment with noise. The radio, the television, endless conversations with strangers in the harbor cafes. Anything to avoid the stillness. Then one winter afternoon, as the snow fell and the sea lay motionless beneath a gray sky, the power went out. There was no hum of appliances, no sound of voices, just the creak of the old wooden beams above his head and his own breathing. He said it was the first time he realized that the silence was not empty. It was alive. It was listening. It was a presence that had been waiting for him all along. A woman in the deserts of New Mexico shared a similar moment. She had moved there to escape the noise of the city, yet found herself restless, pacing the rooms of her adobe home as if she were searching for something. One evening, she sat on the porch as the sun dissolved into the horizon. The air was still. The land seemed infinite, and suddenly she felt not lonely, but held, as if the desert itself had wrapped around her. She spoke of it later as the moment she realized she could never truly be alone, for the earth and the sky were companions, and the silence itself was a kind of love. These are not rare miracles, reserved for mystics on mountaintops. They are awakenings available to anyone willing to stop resisting the stillness and begin listening to it. Theosophy teaches that silence is not the absence of sound. It is a dimension of being in which the voice of the soul can be heard. It is not a void, but a vessel. Not a punishment, but an invitation. In that space, the boundaries between you and the world begin to blur. The walls of the room seem less like barriers and more like gentle frames for a wider reality that is always reaching toward you. Your thoughts slow. Your breathing deepens. And in that slowing, in that deepening, something ancient and familiar rises within you. A strength that was always there, waiting beneath the noise. This is why the goal is not to end loneliness as if it were a disease to be cured. Loneliness, when understood through the theosophical lens, is a teacher. It strips away illusions, showing you the raw truth of your own consciousness. It invites you to discover that the most essential connection you can ever have is the one with your own higher nature. When this truth begins to take root, the entire meaning of your solitude changes. The silence ceases to be a mirror of absence and becomes a temple of presence. The walls, the windows, the chair where you sit, all become part of a sacred chamber where your inner and outer worlds meet. When the silence deepens, it becomes a temple without walls, without ritual, without hierarchy. It needs no incense, no chants, no priests, only your willingness to be fully here, fully aware. In this temple, you are both the seeker and the sought. You are the priest and the pilgrim, and the presence you encounter is not something external. It is the eternal self that has been walking beside you all your life. Those who have crossed this threshold often speak of a paradox. The deeper they go into the silence, the more connected they feel to others. Not because they are speaking more or socializing more, but because the recognition of unity is no longer an abstract belief. It is a living experience. When they meet another person's eyes, they feel the shared spark. When they hear of another's pain, they sense the same field of life that sustains them both. Loneliness then becomes not a burden to escape, but a space you can return to, a sanctuary where you can renew your strength before stepping again into the world. It becomes the well from which your compassion is drawn, the quiet shore from which you set out into the currents of life. And so, if you find yourself in a season of solitude, do not rush to fill it. Do not hurry to drown it in distractions. Sit with it. Walk with it. Listen to what it has been trying to tell you all along. For in its depths lies a presence that is older than your fears, stronger than your doubts, and closer than your own heartbeat. When the silence deepens, it truly does become a temple. And in that temple, you are never alone. There is a truth that echoes through every mystical tradition, every initiatory path, every whisper from the depths of the soul. The journey inward is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Loneliness, as we have walked through it together, is not a flaw to be corrected, nor a wound to be hidden. It is a rite of passage, a threshold that every seeker in one form or another must cross. The ancient teachers knew this. The Theosophical wisdom affirms it. The silence you fear is the doorway to the life you seek. Do not run from the silence. Enter it and listen. There in the stillness you will hear not the absence of life, but the pulse of it. You will hear the quiet rhythms of a greater order, the murmur of the unseen currents that carry you, always, toward your own becoming. The noise of the world will fade, and in its place the voice of your inner master will rise, not as a stranger, but as the part of you that has always known the way. To step into this path is to agree to be changed. It is to allow the loneliness you feel to become the compass that points you toward your true home. The home that is not a place, but a state of being. It is to recognize that the desert of solitude is not barren, but rich with hidden springs. Every grain of sand, every shadow, every star overhead is a message, if you are willing to listen long enough. And so I invite you, no, I summon you, to turn toward that inner horizon, to sit not in resignation, but in reverence, to make of your solitude an altar, and of your attention an offering. Ask yourself, what might I hear if I truly stopped running? What might I discover if I let the silence speak? Share what you find. There are others, perhaps sitting right now in their own small rooms in distant cities and quiet towns, who need to know that their solitude is not a curse. Your story may be the torch that lights their way. Your willingness to speak of your own inward journey may be the bridge they need to cross into their own. The Theosophical path is not meant to be walked in isolation, even though it begins there. It is a path of connection to the highest in yourself, and through that, to the highest in all beings. Let your solitary nights and quiet mornings become the training ground for this deeper communion. Let the silence teach you how to hear the unspoken, how to feel the invisible, how to recognize the eternal in the everyday. We have only begun this exploration. The themes ahead will take us deeper into the ancient wisdom, into the truths that do not age, into the mysteries that live beneath the surface of the ordinary. But before we continue, take this moment, today, tonight, to practice. Turn off the noise, step into your own presence, allow the stillness to wrap around you like a cloak. Breathe, listen, and remember, loneliness is not the end of your path, it is the beginning. The call has been sounded, the door stands open. All that remains is for you to step through.